Everything okay?
Affirmative.
I think that Alien Earth Episode 6 reveals what Boy Cavalier actually wants, and it's even creepier than we ever imagined. Welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in Alien Earth Episode 6. And later, we're going to respond to your comments and correct some mistakes we made in past videos, and don't forget to shop our new Alien Earth merch, links are below. The title of this episode is The Fly, which is fitting because we do see flies later on slurping on synthetic juice, but it's also an homage to Goldblum's classic Cronenberg horror film, The Fly. Now that is a film about a man who accidentally mixes his DNA with a housefly that finds its way into his teleporter. Now typically, references to the fly relate to transformation. For instance, a maggot turns into a fly in real life, and in the movie, Jeff Goldblum slowly turns into a monstrous fly creature. So the theme of this episode is evolution and transformation. Wendy, Toodles, Arthur, and Nibs all go through massive changes, some better than others. However, the movie The Fly isn't just about mutation, it's also about conflict, science versus nature, body versus mind, man versus monster, all of which we see come into conflict in this episode as well. Now initially, just like episode 4, the opening starts without the typical tightly cropped shot of the xenomorph, but rather it focuses on the real predator in this series, the Neverland Research Center. There's a shot showing the xeno being dissected on some kind of plastic table, which fans of Breaking Bad will know cannot be corroded by acid. We also see what looks to be Clem's body, which could have been recovered from the crash site. Now his chest is open, just like Malachite's was in the last episode, so Prodigy was likely poking around in there to see what effects the ticks had on his internal organs. Then Boy Cavalier reads more Peter Pan excerpts to the children over the loudspeaker, starting with,
All children, except one, grow up.
which helps to flesh out why Boy chose this Peter Pan metaphor for the hybrids. He wants the Lost Boys to remain children forever, and should they choose to grow up, especially if it's not in the way Prodigy wants them to grow up, then they're punished for doing so. It's essentially the Icarus effect.
Could you say right now?
The Icarus effect. It comes from a Greek story of Icarus, a man who created wax wings to escape a giant maze, but he ended up flying too close to the sun and crashed into the sea. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers that overconfidence and reckless ambition can have, which is essentially what Prodigy uses as a subtle threat here. This explains why Boy flaunted Wendy's xenocommunication skills to Curly. It was a show of controlled power and a warning of what happens when you step out of line. Stand too tall and the system will humble you, quickly and mercilessly. Now, this is really hypocritical because in episode 2, he told Dame Sylvia that his ultimate goal was,
I want to talk to somebody smarter than me.
but the smarter they get, the more Prodigy tries to rein them in, as this episode proves. What this show does so well is explore what makes us human. For instance, all of the hybrids are having problems that stem from their human emotions and human behavior. So they're trying to understand themselves and the reasons why they act this way. And we can all relate to that. I mean, we've all had problems in our lives that we struggle to overcome. Like for instance, my therapist made me realize something that I never realized about myself. So I was running myself into the ground trying to help everyone with everything all the time. And the anxiety wasn't even about completing the actual task. It was about what would happen if I said no to somebody. My therapist had me do this exercise where we would map out the worst case scenario of letting someone down. And then she would ask, but then what would happen next? And then we'd kept going until we hit the actual end. And you know what I found at the end of all that catastrophizing? People would just figure it out without me. They would handle their own stuff and then they would move on with their own lives. The crushing weight that I felt to be everyone's personal problem solver was coming from inside my own head. I had convinced myself that saying no meant that I was selfish, that taking time for myself was basically abandoning everybody who might need me. But here's the thing, most people weren't even thinking about me that much. They had their own lives to worry about. And that's the kind of breakthrough that therapy can really help you with. Realizing you don't have to carry everyone else's problems is wild, but sometimes your brain is so tangled up in its own logic that you need someone else to help you see the obvious. That's what a good therapist does. They help you to untangle thoughts that keep you stuck in the same patterns. They listen, they ask the right questions, and they help you to see things differently. And I found my therapist through our sponsor, BetterHelp, and they make finding a therapist easy. Fill out their questionnaire and get matched with a therapist in just a couple of days. And if it doesn't click, you can switch at no extra cost. Check out the link below, betterhelp.com/ScreenCrush for 10% off your first month. You won't regret it. BetterHelp has helped me out so much. Now, back to what I was saying. Now, as he continues reading, the passage highlights Wendy as the only child who understood the necessity of growing up, after realizing the mortality of a flower that she picked when she was 2, which essentially foreshadows the arc we see her go on in this episode. Now, this passage is actually the beginning of the entire book, and it's about Wendy realizing that her time as a child is finite and she will have to grow up. And that is exactly what happens to all of the Lost Boys in this episode. They are all forced to grow up in some way. Wendy is debating her place in the world, trying to leverage leverage the advantages over organic humans while navigating the strictures imposed by Prodigy. She grows up, or rather wakes up, to all the ways Prodigy has been manipulating her, despite starting out the episode loyal to them. The specific use of 2 in the passage is not accidental. In fact, it seems to be this episode's magic number. Boy even explains its importance at the end, saying,
2 is the beginning of the end.
Like the title, this also emphasizes the idea of duality. Nearly every interaction in this episode centers around 2 characters representing contrasting sides of the same coin. We have Prodigy and Weyland-Yutani, Morrow and Kirsh, Arthur and Slightly, Sylvia and Wendy, and of course, Adam and Arthur. And we also see this immediately as Wendy connects with the young xenomorph. Now, we've never seen a Xeno in this specific stage of its life cycle on screen before, although Romulus and Covenant came close. Its head remains partially attached to its body, giving us a halfway point between the fully formed adult drone and the snake-like chestburster from episode 4. It even stands in a way that hybridizes its earlier and later stages, like a froglet. That's the stage between a fully grown frog and a tadpole. Both Wendy and the Xeno are essentially caged assets of Prodigy, and the more Wendy communicates with it, the more she begins to find in common with it. At one point, we even see the Xeno's tail follow her hand, as if it's responding to a command. Meanwhile, Marcy's brother and her synthetic stepdad observe from behind the observation glass, representing 2 different aspects of her concept of home. Jo embodies the world she came from before the transfer, the familiar human connections, while Kirsh has been her primary mentor in this new experimental environment. The conversation starts off with Jo carefully prodding for information on how long Wendy's battery lasts, showing how he's already thinking of making a break for it. But this quickly turns into a debate about what's best for Wendy. When Jo starts to explain his idea to Kirsh, he responds with,
That's like an onion asking, how do I take care of a star?
Comparing Jo to something perishable and Wendy to the stalk, which can constantly be replanted. Now, Kirsh completely shuts down the idea, and Jo responds with,
She's just a kid.
And honestly, he's right to correct Jo. Even if it's coming from a good place, Jo still sees her as the child that she clearly is not anymore, something we see Wendy discover for herself later on. Again, she is evolving. Kirsh sees unlimited potential for Wendy.
Your sister has potential to invent faster than light travel and explore the stars for thousands of years.
Now, I think that Kirsh doesn't see Wendy and the others as the next step for human evolution, but the next step for the evolution of synthetics. He is limited by his programming, but Wendy is not. Now, whether or not this serves Kirsh's own agenda, I'll talk about later in the video. So on the surface, Prodigy wants to create free-thinking machines, truly artificial intelligence that they control. And this could be why Kirsh lets these terrible events unfold later on. He wants to see if the Lost Boys are a viable evolutionary step. But I think that Boy Cavalier has a totally different agenda that I'll talk about later in the video. Now, we didn't cut back to Nibs, so we haven't actually seen her since her bad therapy session with Dr. Sylvia, confirming that Nibs's malfunction wasn't mechanical but behavioral, reversing the correction that Boy gave Dr. Sylvia in episode 4.
It's an IT issue, not a gap session.
Adam immediately vetoes therapy and opts to just wipe her clean, saying,
And when the information architects of the 5 talk to her, I want her to be calm and charming.
Which echoes the approach of some parents or even institutions who medicate kids. Now, some drugs can help kids with focus, but they can also blunt a child's personality, dampen their energy, and dim that little spark that makes kids. But it's often an easier solution than rebuilding the education system to suit them. Now, Prodigy sees the hybrids the same way. They want to flaunt the human aspects of the hybrids to investors, but they don't want them to be themselves and all the messiness that comes with that. Instead, they opt to erase her trauma completely, which Adam argues is an act of mercy. But whether we like it or not, trauma helps us grow, which makes this our first example of Prodigy punishing the Lost Boys for growing up. Now, I wonder if Sylvia was so keen to erase Nibs's mind because she was afraid of her, or if she genuinely thinks that this is the kind of correction the kids will need. We see growth punished again as Arthur finally musters the courage to draw an ethical line. However, Dame is happy to comply, which highlights the difference between their monkey-based coping mechanisms that we talked about in episode 4.
Yeah, you gotta be more specific than that person. That was a long time ago.
Fair enough. So, as some of you may remember from our last breakdown, the 3 wise monkey statue hanging above the Lost Boys' beds represent the different methods that Prodigy's employees and assets take to cope with the evil they witness there. They are Mizuru, who sees no evil, Kikazuru, who hears no evil, and Iwazuru, who speaks no evil. They represent the different ways that both the hybrids and the synths cope with the evils that they witness in Neverland. Dame is a Mizuru. She ignores evil, pretends it doesn't exist, and continues trudging forward. She sees no evil. Arthur, on the other hand, is a Kikazuru. He hears no evil. He may see it and is even willing to speak out about it, but he refuses to listen to his conscience about the act until now, and it immediately costs him his job. Like the children, Arthur is not allowed to grow up either. He learned too much, and the moment he refused to play along, he got shit canned, showing how he's just as expendable as everyone else. So this is showing us how the corporation views people, essentially as slaves. Like during slavery, families were often ripped apart and separated when people were sold to other plantations, and we see Prodigy regards human beings, like the hybrids, as mere assets, and they don't mind splitting up a marriage. It's part of this late-stage capitalist nightmare of this world, where everybody is just trying to make money all the time. Which reminds me, I am so excited to show you guys these new Alien Earth merch drops at our merch store. We will see you soon at the Mazzio Zoo, a chestburster with a cane and hat, like this.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey.
We love designing these games for you guys, and thank you so much for supporting us. Links are below. So this takes us to a conversation between Wendy and Joe, which presents yet another complicated duality. Joe criticizes Wendy's Xeno Duolingo lessons, while she points out how they have more in common with them than he would like to admit. Now, this tug of war highlights the tension between Joe's insecurities and Wendy's growing independence. And it's especially sharp because we know how smart she is. He keeps talking down to her and assumes that she's the sister he wants her to be, rather than the one she actually is. And then Joe argues that the real distinction between the humans and the xenomorphs is,
We've got brains, we think, we have community. They survive, eat, sleep, maybe.
to which Wendy replies with,
Bees do that. Ants do that. They have hives, systems.
Now this is not only fitting since insects have always been a major inspiration for the xenomorph's behavior and lifestyle, but it's a fair comparison. What is the difference between a hive and a community?
Well, hives don't have like cool pool parties.
True, and communities tend to provide some sort of emotional support, whether comforting them in tragedy or celebrating with a pool party, something that is uniquely human. Now while hives don't offer any of that, they still offer everything else that community does, at least on paper. They serve the same purpose and provide the same structure. The distinction shows the hybrid's unique perspective. To them, it's about the function, not the feelings, something that we learn later on during her conversation with Dame Sylvia. Now, during this conversation, we see that Wendy doesn't see things in the romanticized way that humans do. So to her, a community and a hive are essentially the same thing. Now, she doubles down on this by taking Prodigy's side, saying,
The boy genius said that no is the first step to nothing. We say yes.
to which they correctly respond with,
If someone tries to take advantage of you, tries to hurt you, then no gives you power. It gives you power over your body, power over your life.
shifting the conversation to an important lesson about consent. Victims of sexual assault often cite feeling like they were in a position where they couldn't say no, and their autonomy was taken from them, and Joe expands on that argument here. The word choice is intentional, given how the first movie was a metaphor for rape and sexual predation. However, Joe's lesson immediately backfires on him as he discusses a plan to escape, and Wendy responds with,
What if I don't want to go?
essentially saying no to him, which wasn't something he was expecting, and shows that she already understands the lesson that he's trying to teach. Now we get a bonus needle drop in the middle of the episode as we see Boy flying off to meet with Yutani while Tessellate by Alt J plays, which drives home one of the central themes of this episode. The name comes from tessellation, or fitting shapes together without gaps, which is used as a metaphor for the complex patterns and connections in relationships, much like the ones that we see throughout this episode. One line in particular plays just before the meeting begins to be a reference to this meeting being one of the few three-way interactions we see in the episode, with Yutani, Boy, and the moderator, like the three sides of a triangle. The moderator wears the same kind of bladed collar tuxedo that Carter Burke wore in Aliens, just like the one that we saw Adam wearing earlier. Boy walks in barefoot, showing a sense of childlike irreverence, kicking his feet up on the table to recreate the initial shot we got of him when he was first mentioned on the Maginot in episode 1. He acts like an entitled brat all throughout the negotiation, especially when he says,
Yeah, look, I don't know how things are done here in Bureaucracyville, but in the future, where I live, we move fast and we make trillions.
referencing Meta's old mission statement, move fast and break things, which encourages aggressive innovation even at the risk of making mistakes. It's become a fundamental philosophy of Silicon Valley tech bros, despite the fact that it usually ends up breaking things rather than moving fast. At first, Boy pretends,
It's not about money.
just to immediately settle for $20 billion afterwards, but he reminds her that he gets to keep them in quarantine for 6 weeks,
That is with a Brubaker Accord.
which is actually a niche reference to your mom. 6 weeks is more than enough time for Boy to breed a whole army of xenomorphs, and that's when we see Boy's true motivations when he rejects her $50 billion offer.
But that's more than twice what he already agreed to.
Right, but he wasn't lying when he said this wasn't about money, it's about power. And as long as Boy has the scariest monster in the room, he holds it, and that's worth a lot more than money can buy. That said, he's still a hypocrite, especially when he claims that Yutani can't truly own them, saying,
They're living creatures. I mean, technically they don't belong to anyone.
Which is the complete opposite of how he treats his employees, but also how he himself has treated the specimens in his possession. He even calls the people of New Siam my citizens, hitting back on that theme of slavery that we talked about earlier. He tells Yutani,
Your thoughts and prayers for all the victims of the Mazzio crash are always welcome.
a clear nod to the same apathetic sentiment that we've seen many US politicians share in the wake of a mass shooting, which is typically made in bad faith simply to avoid a risky political debate on gun regulations. Now this only validates the concerns that Morrow brought to Yutani at the end of the last week's episode. We then get another confrontation between two sides of the same coin, as Morrow and Kirsh bump into each other on the elevator, giving us the most tense elevator conversation since this.
Not great, Bob!
So this show has set these two up as opposing forces, but they actually have a lot in common. Both are sidekicks to some of the most powerful figures in the world, and both are using Slightly's perspective to spy on the other, which Kirsh subtly flexes by saying,
The almost human, self-hating machine. They must envy me.
Using the revelation Morrow gave us in episode 3 against him.
To be all machine instead of what I am. The worst parts of the man.
When Morrow tries to intimidate him back, he talks about how he enjoys killing synths over humans because of how they react, implying that he's not only murdered synths, but also humans. Kirsh isn't impressed, responding with,
I would imagine it's the pain that makes it satisfying. That moment when you realize you're not a machine after all. When the first eyeball pops.
which is not only equally as eerie, but implies that he too has committed murder, since he seems to be speaking from experience, which by the way would be a much bigger deal because he is a synth, and that is super illegal for a synth to kill a human.
Right to jail, right away.
As he exits, Morrow leaves him with,
I'll see you soon, old toy.
which is a cutting summarization of not only Kirsh, but also all of Boy Cavalier's employees and assets. Everything under Prodigy's control is essentially a playground for Boy to do with as he pleases. They're to be used, abused, and played with at his discretion, which reframes Prodigy's teddy bear logo in a whole new dark light. Now, Dame Sylvia is working on nibs, which she describes as,
Isn't that a gift? To be able to remove the trauma.
However, her gift immediately backfires the moment Wendy wakes her up. Wendy quickly realizes that she's missing the last 2 days, and we can see the adjustment in Nibs' emotions as she continues brushing her hair after Wendy leaves, rather than the traumatic response that she had last time. Boy then reads yet another grim Peter tale excerpt, painting Peter as a ghostly child killer haunting Wendy, which really distances him from the whimsical hero that we know, but it's a perfect mirror for the side that Prodigy has revealed in this episode. This passage is just before the kids meet Peter Pan and he takes them to Neverland. Now in the book, Neverland represents embracing your eternal childhood where you never age, and not aging also means you don't grow or evolve. So all of the Lost Boys in this episode are reaching a kind of threshold. They are doing the opposite of what Neverland represents. They're evolving, as Kirsh wants them to, while Adam wants them to stay the same for their stockholders. And Boy Cavalier has a different goal in mind for them that I'll talk about later on. Next, we see another two sides of the same coin conversation, this time between Slightly and Smee, both of whom are dealing with the weight of growing up, but from very different perspectives. Smee simply wants to be a kid in a world where everyone around him is growing up without him, whereas Slightly's resentment comes from immediate trauma.
Same, but different.
Slightly tracks down Joe, who's drawing out his escape plan while the camera pans over to Slightly in the background, just like how we've seen them frame xenomorphs in previous episodes. Now he couldn't be more sus the entire time, but Joe is saved by the bell when one of his marine buddies comes and picks him up. Then they patrol the jungle in the rain, which gives heavy Predator vibes. Siberian asks,
Is that really your sister?
And we get what seems to be an honest assessment of how she's legitimate. He sees Wendy's transition when he says,
She is to me anyway.
He sees her as fully human, even if Prodigy doesn't and everyone else has told him otherwise. When he starts casually probing for ways to escape, Siberian tries to keep him in line. Now she's aware of the threats Neverland is trying to contain, but doesn't rock the boat because, at least there,
But if I'm here, at least I know where they are.
this is yet another example of somebody choosing that Kikazuru coping style. She can recognize evil and even talk about it amongst friends, but she still chooses to ignore it by not listening to her conscience, just like Arthur. So Kirsh calls Toodles and tells him to take care of the specimens in the lab, but he decides to do this alone, which we now know to be a fatal mistake. But the reason he chooses to do this alone is because he too is trying to evolve. He's trying to prove that he is capable of doing these things alone. Now, like Curly and Wendy, Isaac is one of the few Lost Boys who started to grow up, which is why Kirsh trusted him with the responsibility in the first place. And just as Boy foreshadowed at the beginning of this episode, growing up is not allowed. If they ever get too smart or even too emotional like Nibs, Prodigy prunes them quicker than the TVA, and that is exactly what we see happen to Toodles here.
But I thought it was an accident.
Right, but this could have been planned by Kirsh because it all starts with the door to the fly's feeding chamber being jammed. So maybe Kirsh actually doesn't want to see the hybrids evolve. Maybe he wants them to fail so he won't be replaced. So Kirsh could have set this entire trap for Toodles.
But why would he do that?
Well, if any of the hybrids can grow beyond his capabilities, then he becomes obsolete. Last year's model, as Morrow reminded him in the elevator. That could be why Kirsh takes out any Lost Boys who start showing signs of growth, ensuring that he remains relevant by any means necessary. This also makes Kirsh the ultimate forever boy, but more like a realistic, unsettling take on the character that you'd see in the darker retellings of Peter Pan. For instance, like in Blood in the Water, written by M.A. Kirsh, who could be the inspiration for his name. Blood in the Water portrays Peter as a child-murdering psychopath, like the one we hear about in the final passage, when Boy reads,
When they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out.
Now, of course, all of this could be a stretch, but what we do know for sure is that he watched this whole thing but stayed silent. He's locked in like an iPad kid the whole plane ride, so at minimum, he's maliciously complicit in what happens here. Now, Toodles' death gives us our first close look at the creatures that we're calling the flies. Unlike the other specimens we've seen so far, they actually pose a threat to the sense since they feed on inorganic material. Now, while it's uncommon for organic life to feed on inorganic material, certain species of mealworms and beetles can actually eat and digest plastics. However, they do so by spraying an acid-like substance that turns their prey into a synthetic syrup that they can slurp up, much like the bombardier beetles, which spray boiling corrosive liquids from their abdomen to deter predators. It also seems like the ocelot is much more hostile to synths than to humans, as it's the one who delivers the jump scare that seals Toodles' fate, which by the way seems to be a stark contrast to how it feels about humans, given what we saw last episode when it tried to warn Dr. Chibuzzo about the ticks escaping, and how it took on the Xeno one-on-one while Morrow made his escape. We even see the octo-sheep standing on its hind legs in victory as the flies start feasting before moving on to Wendy's confrontation with Dame in one of her most defining scenes yet. Wendy sits in the same spot Dame was in when Nibs attacked her, subtly showing how she is the one in control, while Dame slowly creeps up toward the emergency button throughout the conversation. Cindy Chandler really brings the concept of the hybrids to life here, delivering a monologue that feels like an adolescent coming into consciousness, using every SAT word at her disposal to describe that feeling. She then goes full Ultron when she says,
I don't want to be people anymore if this is what people are.
So she says she's looking for objective truth, which for humans does not exist. Humans are always going to be limited in some way by our perception of the world. We are literally limited by our five senses. But a machine could theoretically overcome those limitations and perceive the world without the filter of human emotions. So Wendy embraces her emotionless synthetic side and all of the advantages that come with it, as Kirsh has always wanted. Or, as she puts it,
see the world for what it really is, not how it feels.
Like Nibs and Toodles, she is growing up too, but she's the only one with the real privilege to do so because she's Wendy. Now, Dame doesn't realize how headstrong she is about this, saying,
My only job is to make sure that nothing gets lost.
Marcy immediately points out how this wasn't the case with Nibs, but Dame argues,
we helped her.
Which shows just how much she's gaslit herself. She's willing to cooperate with Prodigy even when it means compromising her values. But here, she almost seems to argue it as a means to an end. She is doing everything she can to ensure the other Lost Boys can keep what little of themselves they have left after the transfer, and that they don't lose little parts of themselves like Nibs did. But in doing so, she's becoming the very thing she set out to prevent. And we see Wendy points this out when she says,
what if you're what's wrong?
Now, Wendy has clearly figured out that Neverland isn't as safe as she thought, and we see this question again in the next scene with Joe and Arthur. The two of them are the most human characters on the show. They both display genuine empathy for Marcy, but it comes from different places. They're also both Kikazurus, the monkey who hears no evil. Both of them recognize what Prodigy is doing and are willing to speak on it, but they choose to not listen to their conscience when it comes time to do something about it. However, Arthur breaks from the proverbial monkey metaphors when he slips Joe the code, since at this point, he's got nothing to lose, even flaunting the fact that he has 6 degrees, which is a morbid reminder of the rapidly declining value of a college education.
Oh, that's gotta hurt.
Now, of course, his moment of courage is punished with immediate bad karma as he realizes Toodles' tracker is offline. Arthur falls right into Slightly's trap as Kirsh silently watches, which at this point has to confirm that he intentionally set Toodles to his death. Slightly seizes the opportunity, using the distraction to open the cages just like Petrovich used the fire to do the same on the Mazzio. Before getting snagged by the facehugger, we can see another caterpillar-like creature in one of the tubes that we haven't seen before. And given that it can't be one of the 5 species recovered from the Mazzio, this could mean that Prodigy is keeping some of their own discoveries in there as well. Or it could mean that the flies have metamorphosized into this caterpillar maggot-like creature. When Arthur meets Slightly at the door, he tells him,
Here's my family.
I have a family too.
Hoping to appeal to Slightly's empathy, but he's unfazed. The scene shows how vulnerable family makes us and how it can be weaponized against us, further fleshing out some of the darker sides of humanity, just like we saw in the last episode. Now, the fact that we watch Arthur go down like this after everything he's done almost presents him as a Job-like figure. In the Bible, Job always did right by God, but was plagued with heartbreak and tragedy just so that God could win a bet with the devil. Arthur is the same way. He tries to do right rather than just doing what he needs to do to survive. And the universe continues to punish him for his good works. We're seeing how compassion is a trait that gets you killed. Arthur's compassion for Isaac and Slightly's compassion for his parents get Arthur killed, whereas the xenomorph has no compassion and is considered to be the perfect life form. Arthur is like another one of Prodigy's toys, just like Wendy, hence why we closed out with her in the same pose, like a discarded toy. We see this echoed when we turn back to Boy, who's standing in the cockpit pretending to fly, imagining himself to be Peter Pan. The world is his playground and no one else's. So Kirsh watches this whole thing go down in the monitor, but he keeps it all from Boy, which further validates that he has his own agenda. As Slightly secures his body, he releases the rest of the flies, which means there's not only about to be a Xeno on the loose, but the synthetics also have their own parasitic insect-based threat as well. Only the Oculus remains as we close out with Godsmack's Keep Away, a song about setting boundaries and demanding distance from toxic people. Specifically, it's about retaliating against someone who has dragged them through a wasted life, something that we watched nearly everyone in this episode attempt with mixed results. Wendy distanced herself from Dame and Prodigy's propaganda, and Joe tries to establish boundaries with both Wendy and Prodigy as a whole. Siberian sets boundaries with Joe, and Kirsh silently establishes the distance that he's willing to keep from Boy. They, for the most part, are rewarded for establishing these boundaries, but while characters like Arthur and Toodles do the opposite, they pay the price for it. Now, before I talk about Boy Cavalier's hidden agenda, let's correct some errors in our last few breakdowns that I am very sorry about.
We're sorry. We're sorry.
In our episode 4 breakdown, we talked about the significance of the doll head in the intro, but we forgot to mention that it's a clear shout out to Newt's doll in Aliens. We also had several mispronunciations in our earlier scripts, such as pronouncing Kirsh for Krish or Macy for Marcy. Or my least favorite mistake we've ever made, Boy Cavalier instead of Boy Cavalier. This is because, candidly, sometimes I just get in the zone and I read everything on the teleprompter, and there were a lot of mistakes that the spell checker didn't catch in the script. For instance, IMDb did not list the character names for the first 2 episodes, so that's where we made the most mistakes. That episode was also a nightmare to post online because Fox literally claimed the episode. They claimed every single Alien movie, even though it all falls under fair use, but we didn't want to wait a week to dispute it, so instead we had to upload the entire thing as still frames the next day. In fact, you've probably noticed this entire video is still frames just because we don't have the time to challenge and win every single dispute that 20th Century Fox puts against us. Also, in episode 3, we talked about how Kirsh dissected the facehuggers, but as one person in her comments pointed out, technically, when you're experimenting on a live specimen, it's called a vivisection and not a dissection. In episode 5, we talked a lot about how the death of Morrow's daughter shaped his character, but we forgot to connect the similarities between him and Ridley, since she also lost a daughter while she was in cryosleep. And finally, the movie that Slightly was watching in his room when Morrow first contacted him was Disney's 2013 film Epic, and not the epic film Frozen. Again, that's completely my fault. I didn't recognize the frame. I forgot there was a movie called Epic, and I assumed the script left the word Frozen out. That's really my fault. I'm so sorry. Now, let's talk about what I think Boy Cavalier is actually up to here. Earlier in the series, he claimed that he wanted to create an AI so advanced that it could actually provide him with a good conversation. But we've also heard him say that his company is called Prodigy because he believes that adults are the worst and kids should control the world. So he sees himself as the Peter Pan in the story, and Peter Pan is the kid who never grows up. So I don't think he cares at all about the hybrids evolving or using them as a financial asset. He wants to perfect this technology so he can be placed in a child's body and remain forever young. So to him, the Lost Boys are test subjects for his own body. He wants to know that when he's transferred into a robot body, he'll be able to keep his personality and mind intact. But maybe, I'll go you one further, maybe he's already done this to himself. Maybe he was actually an old man who has already transferred his mind into this younger body. And maybe he really does want one of the Lost Boys to evolve to a point where they can hold a conversation with him because he is another hybrid. He is the original hybrid, the Peter Pan, who will take them all off to Neverland. So, what did you guys think about this episode? Are there any details we missed? If you loved it, let me know in the comments or on Twitter, Blue Sky Threads, or our free to join Discord server. And if you hated it, go yell at Dots and Sides. He wrote this. You can find out his channel link below. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.